Hi, can everyone hear me? Sounds like it. Okay. Glad to be the first session right after lunch. Probably a little bit sleepy now, but that's okay, because in the presentations I've been listening to thus far, a lot of the same themes that you heard are ones that I'll somewhat reiterate during this presentation as well. So this is a joint presentation between the solution provider, Vimachem, and the customer, which is myself, Sharp. As you heard, my name is Stephen Kinney. I'm the Director of Business Applications and Analytics, which is convenient because Vimachem is both an application that's also used for business analytics. Alex?
Yeah. Good to meet you, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm the Executive Director of Vimachem. We'll have a presentation today that will focus on compliance, but we'll also focus a lot on efficiency and how the two can be mixed. So excited to be here, Stephen.
All right, so the context and the purpose of this case study. This is not a vendor pitch. This is a real feedback from a customer that I'm representing here, Sharp, on our actual implementation of this solution at our site. So we are actually a multi-site company. I'm only representing the one site, which implemented the OEE module of Vimachem. And let's get into it. All right, so the challenge of OEE in sterile pharma. All right, so OEE is a relatively simple concept, and it's used in a lot of different industries. In pharma, and specifically in the CDMO and sterile manufacturing space that I work in, it's a bit challenging. Because we don't actually own the products that we produce, we're contracted to produce them, the linkage between our OEE and our revenue per se is not as direct as one might assume. Also in the pharma industry, and specifically the sterile space, we have to deal with clean rooms or isolators. This makes it pretty difficult to put new pieces of equipment, new surfaces that might become contaminated and contaminate your product in place. And then there's the regulatory framework and fee that is overarching all of that and is kind of scaring away new technologies sometimes. Okay, so here's the intended takeaways from this session. We're going to talk about the overview of how the implementation went. We're going to talk about some practical guidance that we learned and I can pass on to you. We'll talk about some of the challenges we went through and how a solution can be put into one of your facilities that's sustainable and has a growth-minded. All right, so why did we choose Vimachem for our OEE system? Well, there's actually quite a few reasons. So as I said, I represent only one site, and we are implementing this solution at a number of sites. In our case, since we just have done OEE right now, OEE is not really a GMP metric. It is more of a business metric. But Vimachem does offer a GMP software system, something that can be fully validated and compliant. What that allowed or offered to us is the ability to grow from here. So if we start small with an OEE implementation, something that scope seems manageable, we can continue to grow from there through a continuous improvement process. And that's where the modular architecture of the Vimachem solution comes into play. There's logbooks, there's digital batch records. There's a whole bunch of other facets to the Vimachem architecture or system that we could potentially grow to after this small-scale implementation. Another reason is it allowed us to really target a rapid and accelerated ROI. So with OEE, we're able to very quickly determine a key metric that we were looking to calculate. And without a whole lot of new procedures and new training and new compliance requirements, we could implement that in just a few weeks even. Oh. That's mostly facilitated by this IoT-based connectivity that Vimachem offers. So they will come in and install a device that doesn't necessarily have to be associated with your GMP production systems, but it's sitting there and collecting data and feeding back to their cloud-based system and giving us the metrics and the visualizations that we look for.
Yep. Yeah. We were chatting before with Steven, and one of the things that he was telling me is that they really didn't believe how fast the implementation will go. And that speed of implementation, I've personally been in the pharma business the last 10 years, and everybody's speaking about speed, but it feels like the last 2-3 years, feels like it's all about speed. So that whole modularity and the ability of deploying a use case that brings value to the business and doing it differently. So we're working with multiple sites with Sharp, and some sites only do OEE, some other sites do more like GMP critical data collection, some sites do the combination. So that ability to deploy modularly and achieve the speed but also help the business with what's needed is the key reason why the platform was built to be modular. And it's a key thesis that allows you to really compose it to different applications that can add value.
Okay, so let's next talk about our deployment philosophy, kind of how we scoped it. So as I said, and as he said, fast to deploy, but practical to sustain. What that requires is that we establish an appropriate scope. So biting off more than you can chew can very easily lead the project to failure. We were focused on an incremental implementation process. So we could narrow the scope as much as we'd like to just get it in the door. And then through an incremental feedback, rapid feedback loop, we could continue to expand how we use the system and what modules we can potentially use in the future. What was important here is that it was sustainable. So this was an additional requirement onto our existing processes. We didn't want it to become an additional burden, however. So we had to make sure we were putting this in place in a slow enough manner that it wasn't being rejected because of how much additional burden this was placing upon our internal processes. So here's the overview of our implementation and how far we've gotten thus far. So we put in place these IoT devices. They were put in place, honestly, in a matter of hours. We spent quite a bit of time internally focusing on the process, the definitions, and the people training, because the technology solution, as I said, is already there. It's ready. It's working. It's the training of the individuals. It's the agreement on the definitions of your KPIs, your stop reasons. That's what takes a lot of time and thought. So after we've gone through that training, that procedure development process, we were starting to get real data out of the system that we could agree was of high enough quality to continue working towards a visualization and kind of a notification process. So this is the kind of the phase we're in right now. This is where our leadership can actually see how our manufacturing lines are doing on any given day at any given moment. Our operators in the rooms are able to see real-time feedback on how their shift is running, how the last shift ran. And it's given us the ability to do a little bit of planning and predictability in the operational insights that it's given us thus far. So here is the generic overview of how the architecture works. I've kind of told you a little bit about these IoT devices, but they essentially sit somewhere in your facility and collect the data, usually at the machine level. And they interpret that data, normalize it, and then send it up to the cloud as in the form of database entries, more or less. That database and the cloud system that Vimachem has developed is what creates the OEE calculation that we rely on in our visualization. So they have their calculation engine, their visualization engine up in the cloud, and that provides real-time feedback back to us, whether it's at the leadership level, via boards throughout the facility that display KPIs, or inside of the manufacturing lines where they have their own unique HMIs. Okay, so the three pillars that we had to base our implementation around: people, process, and technology. I already kind of mentioned technology. We'll spend a little bit time upon that. But the first two, people and process, are probably the most critical and sometimes the most time-consuming. So we had to make sure during our implementation that the people are feeling ownership of this system. We had you could say somewhat fortuitous circumstance that we were trying to track OEE manually ourselves using a combination of manual spreadsheets and data entry. So when we introduced this new tool that was able to take away probably 50, 60, 70% of that manual process, the operators and the people down on the shop floor were actually quite excited about that. It did not become a situation that you might see in other companies where it appears to be a surveillance implementation where the management is trying to figure out why operations aren't happening faster, and that's not the relationship you want to develop. So in our case, because we had that already burdensome process in place, this new solution we were able to hand off to the shop floor personnel as something that could improve their lives rather than make them more burdensome. And then the last bullet here, the common language alignment. We spent quite a bit of time on the process part of things, defining your stop reason codes, defining your KPIs. Coming up with these definitions, while we did do it in a somewhat iterative fashion, initially we needed a very strong set of definitions, and we've changed it slightly over time. But the important part is that we spend all that time up front figuring out exactly how many different reason codes we were going to need. Too many, and your operators will not know which one is the correct one to select, or they might select the incorrect one. Too few, and you won't have the granularity you're looking for to make leadership decisions based off of. Okay, diving in a little bit to the people that we talked about. So in order to increase that ownership by our team and by the shop floor folks, we gave them basically the leadership decision on how they wanted to proceed. We heavily involved them in a whole cross-functional team of IT and QA and QC in the creation of the definitions of the process. And I think more importantly, once we were using the system, the feedback loop on creating improvements, fixing bugs if we found any, fixing problems, and further developing our procedures was where I think Vimachem really shined. So when we got a bug reported to us, it was very important to us that we immediately provide feedback to that reporting user saying, hey, we understand that this is a problem. We're going to report this to our vendor support. And the vendor support was back to us within a couple of hours, sometimes a day or two at most. And they told us, okay, well, I've analyzed your system. I'm able to access it remotely. I can see exactly what you encountered. We know why it's happening. And here's our workaround while we work on a solution, or here's the solution right off. Communicating that right back to the reporting user, giving them the sense that they are actively participating in a project that is becoming more successful every day, gives them the ownership that they need to feel in order for this project to be successful.
Yeah. Stephen, if you allow me to add here. So we've been working together for about a year, and the feedback that we have been receiving is that during that year, the product itself has improved a lot, and we are speaking about an already mature solution, but you all know that there is continuous improvement in everything, the people, the processes, and the software. So something that has been very important for us is how do you incorporate the feedback and you continuously improve the platform, and we are able to do that because we release monthly, and because we have the ability to be deployed both on-premise or in the cloud or in a single tenant. We do not have to force releases to the customers, so they can still get the improvement of the platform without having to upgrade all the systems that they may not need. So that continuous platform improvement has been really important, and collecting that feedback and giving it back to the business is the best way for the customer to really feel that relationship and that trust. So really happy to hear that.
The next pillar was the process. So making sure we have clear definitions. How do you define when the schedule is locked, for instance? Is the event that you just rescheduled considered a scheduled change, or is it just not schedule adherence? How do you define a certain type of stop that you are encountering? Is it part of your routine process? Is it sometimes part of your routine process? Thinking about these definitions is probably the most important part of an OEE implementation. It does take quite a bit of time and critical thinking skills from your leadership to come up with these. But it's very important to make sure that the ownership of those definitions comes from your shop floor personnel. Because while the managers, they may have their ideas about what they want to track and what they want to find out more about so that they can improve it, if their idea of what the definition isn't jiving with what's being seen on the shop floor, they won't be entered correctly, and the data you're getting, while it may be accurate, you won't be able to make the correct decisions based off of it. And technology challenges. So we had a few minor technology challenges. I can say that none of the challenges we faced caused us to have to rethink our implementation process. What they did do is they made us think about how we're going to plan to overcome these challenges, developing that feedback loop from the user that encounters the problem, has a question, isn't sure how it's working or if it's working properly, all the way to the tech support resource at the supplier side or the vendor side that's able to look in the back end and understand what the user's seeing, why it's confusing to them, and then back to the user. Making sure that you have those processes developed internally so that that feedback can get back to the user as quickly as possible will keep up the project momentum. It won't stall. People won't find a bug and then wonder why it's still there 2 months later and think that the project either is a failure or just not being supported. So the technology issues that you may have seen on the last slide, I mentioned how important it is to address these without losing momentum. And Alex here mentioned how they have their monthly software releases. I can't emphasize enough how important it is that technology issues are addressed rapidly. They may not be fixed rapidly, but they're addressed. Users that submit issues, questions into a ticketing system or some kind of inbox and don't get feedback, sometimes within a few minutes or hours, it can be very discouraging. It can cause them to not use the system enough. And that's where you start getting data that is either invalid or data that doesn't have any associated mapping to it. So it's extremely important in this kind of an implementation that the user feedback cycle be extremely rapid. So looking at the common challenges going across pharma and other regulated sites, I've mentioned most of them here, but downtime tagging inconsistency is a pretty common one. This is where either the time that the system is down is not tagged at all or it's tagged incorrectly. This can be mitigated by training, but also thorough review by the supervisors. The definitions that I've mentioned before are critically important, the training on those definitions. If an operator has a period of downtime and they don't know how it should be logged, then they may not log it or they may not log it correctly. If the supervisor is reviewing a period of time or a shift to see that there are pieces of time that aren't logged properly. They may try and go back and fix it, but their ability to do that at that time is often severely handicapped by their lack of knowledge of something that happened 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago. The next common challenge has to do with micro stops, and this is more common on manual and semi-automated lines. We implemented this solution, one on a manual line, one on a semi-automated line, and one on an automated line. In the case of micro stops, these are time periods where there's a small loss of productivity, but any one stop, for instance, maybe you have to adjust a vial that is tipped over. It isn't noticed at that time because it only takes maybe a few seconds to fix. But if this is happening multiple times throughout a run, our old manual processes using spreadsheets weren't catching these because we were only logging major stoppages. These micro stops often go unrecognized until you have a solution that's automated like this, that can pull data directly from the machine and see that you have actually stopped for a few seconds hundreds of times in the past hour. Then the last two bullets here, the misinterpretation, that can come a lot from having these different definitions between what leadership thinks the definition is and what your shop floor think the definition is, and your manual versus digital data clashes. So since we were having a very burdensome manual tracking method for OEE prior to this, we fortunately were able to transition away from that as a result of this solution. But when you have two systems like that running side by side, you can definitely run into issues about which system is the most trustworthy. So these are our early results. Now, in fairness, we've only been collecting what we consider quality data for the past 2 months or 2 full months. So while we have gotten data, we have been able to visualize it and see commonalities. We haven't yet gotten to the point where we're able to do any kind of predictive or prescriptive actions based off of it. Some of the positives we have seen thus far, though, I have mentioned, such as recognizing those microstops. Formerly, those were entirely missed, but now that we have a solution that's able to see them every hour, we are able to basically know more information than we knew before. The reduced administrative burden has been a huge boon to our productivity. Not having to have someone go and enter data into an Excel spreadsheet every few minutes has been very helpful and very thankful from our shop floor. And it's allowed us to have more data-driven performance discussions. So now that we actually have a real computed KPI that we can trust, and we can look back on a record of a recent batch or a recent series of batches, a campaign, we can show, without having to rely on anecdotal evidence, what actually happened. And we can have those data-driven discussions going forward. So why did we avoid a fully MES solution initially? As I've mentioned, we wanted to roll out something that gave us an immediate ROI. We were trying to build up a solution that we could use and scale in the future. We wanted to rely upon analytics that were giving us real data that were giving us options that we could actually implement. The digital transformation that we're seeing right now is something we were really looking forward to getting on the bandwagon with. And this is what's letting us get our feet wet into that.
Yeah, and to add to that, the ability of having the operators interacting with digital devices, the ability to correct critical parameters from a GMP validated system which is used on the other side of Sharp, and the ability to start reading and writing to your equipment, put the right basis to expand to other modules that are more compliance-based, for example, like electronic batch records. So we've been seeing a lot this adoption by starting from the shop floor and achieving the efficiency that is required for modern operations on the same time that you are building a compliance-based solution.
All right, so what do we recommend? Start with an OEE implementation. Start with something small, a scale or in a scope that you can actually achieve, and get that first quick win. Get that momentum building. Make sure you're defining your conditions, agree on your definitions, set that governance so that your ownership is at the level that will prevent the kind of negative feedback that I mentioned before. And embed these OEE metrics, this data, into your everyday conversations. Put them in your weekly meetings, your daily stand-ups. And lastly, our steps of where we're going from here. As I said, we're a multi-site location, so we'll continue to roll this out at other sites. Since it is a GMP-ready piece of software, we already have sites that are working on an implementation with other modules that will actually be gathering GMP data and have a validated system. We'll also be expanding on the analytics and the visualizations. There's a whole range of customizations and additional visualization tools that Vimachem offers, as well as API access that we'll be looking at. All right, so success in the OEE implementation is really based upon trust, not based upon metrics. So you want to have trust from your operators that they have a system and a process they can rely on and that they own. And you want trust from the leadership that the data that they're being given is of high quality. So a bit over time, but here's the closing thoughts. So this was a case study on just one implementation of this software solution at one of our sites. I provided a little bit of insights into how that implementation went, where we're going from here, and what kind of challenges we had.